Perrott. I am a trademark and copyright lawyer. I'm Eric Perrott. As lawyers, we love very dumb, punny titles to pretty much any, because we have no fun other than to create punny titles for presentations. So that's mine. We're going to talk about generative AI. This idea that's been floating around of, we're calling it AI, and we'll talk about whether that's actually a good name for it, but generally things like ChatGPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, you may have heard kind of some of these things. We'll talk about what they are, how they came to be a little bit, but then we'll kind of get right into some of the pros and cons of using them for various tasks you're trying to complete.
Yeah, so my name is Schoon. You'll see me around. I've got one of the staff badges. I'm often just walking the floor, trying to make sure everyone's having a great Unpub, especially those for whom, if it's your first time, right, make sure to speak up, say hi, hey, here's a thing I could use help with. And so I work in tech. I both make games, but I'm also a consultant. And so AI is a thing that I have to know about. So, it's a thing that I'm happy to answer questions with. It's not something that I use in my work every day, unlike some of the other software developers that I work with. So I'm especially fascinated to hear what your questions are and what your concerns are. But we do have some kind of primers and such to go through. Also, this was Eric's original idea, but I put together these terrible slides. So if the slides are bad, it's my fault. If the talk is good, it's his fault.
We could also just say that an AI did it, right?
This is true.
I plugged it into the
AI.
And also
That's a big reveal at the end, right?
That's right. I like that idea, though. And so, I'm Eric, and I am also, my firm sponsors the event, mostly just because I like to be around creative people. And I'm not a game designer, I'm a musician, but I also just...
I'm a lawyer.
Well, and I'm a lawyer. That's true. And so I think that this event is absolutely incredible. I am inspired every time that I come by all of you that are actually kind of creating in this space and coming up with new ideas and allowing me to play test them is something I really enjoy. So thank you for having me here. And if you ever have questions about trademarks, copyrights, licensing agreements, publishing agreements, hopefully all of you will have questions about publishing agreements if you're a designer and looking to do that. Please feel free to reach out to me. I have a bunch of cards I can give to you, but happy to be a resource even if you don't have a legal project right now. I'm always happy to talk about this kind of stuff.
Show me some use cases?
Yeah. So I think that the biggest kind of use cases that you will likely see in why we're here at Unpub is this idea of artwork and idea generation. I think those are probably the two that I can see the most useful ways to utilize a generative AI program and create those into something that you can quickly prototype and then you can just as quickly throw away because you did not spend hundreds of dollars with a designer or with a freelancer. You can come up with something new and it can keep going very quickly. You can kind of see what's in your mind's eye. Use of this, but there's going to be some catches to it. And I think the first part would be a question for everyone is who has used a generative AI program, even just messing around with it. So ChatGPT, okay, at least people have typed something in and seen magic text appear or images appear. So at least we're coming from a pretty good standpoint of people who have seen it. How many people are familiar with how it actually works? Okay, so mixed results. I will try to give the shortest explanation of how a generative AI model works. My wife is a data scientist. She works for works with the government on very large data sets, and so she could explain this much better than I can, but I will try my best. Essentially, it is an algorithm that is trained on a very large set of data that is trying to make predictions about what you want to see when you type in whatever you type in. So it is not generating something out of nothing. It's not going to just give you random ideas of saying kind of like, give me 5 ideas. It might try to come up with something, but what it is essentially doing is it's taking the hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of pieces of data that were fed into it and trying to come up with a logical conclusion based on what it knows from what it learned from being fed into the system. If you have typed a comment on Reddit, if you have been on Stack Exchange, if you've been on pretty much any publicly available Twitter, then you have probably contributed to training this model because that's where all that information came into, completely without the permission of the people who typed it. And that's a question, a concern that we'll get into, but that is essentially how that works. It takes this kind of text and it tries to make these relationships very quickly using very expensive computers that are trying to kind of just make those connections as quick as possible and spit it out. That's why you'll see it's not instant. It does take time. It does sometimes take time to load. And it's probably going to be the downsides of trying to do this in real time is that we'll say, okay, here's this great idea, click, and then we'll wait. And the kind of thing will spin, and then we'll kind of like awkwardly look at each other, and then it'll appear on the screen, and we'll see it. But hopefully we'll skip some of that with some of the examples. But that is how it works, and it works in a few different ways. One is through images. So it literally is from a prompt attempting pixel by pixel to figure out what likely comes next. And so that's why you get sometimes 6 fingers because it sees a finger, sees another finger, and it doesn't quite know where to stop. So sometimes it'll have like, monstrosity hands as a big complaint. It's also in text. So you ask it something, it'll respond in text. And the other one is code. It does a surprisingly good job. Well, I guess I can ask also you. It does a functional job for people like me. I went to PAX Unplugged and I wanted all of the things on the Board Game Geek list of the new and upcoming games section. I wanted them ranked by player count and by overall weight and score. And it basically gave me this wonderful breakdown of what code I could plug into Python, or Python code to plug into the Colab I was using and all this kind of stuff to give me a nice little spreadsheet. So it was really cool, but it also is not likely what we're going to talk about here. But those are, I think, the 3 main things. Is there other kind of things we see out in the wild that are using generative AI?
I think those are really good. I think the flip side is what I would bring to it, which is, so like Eric said, it's really good at understanding what words are likely to follow other words. There are, at a deeper technical level, there are actually lots of different algorithms layered on top of each other, and each one, say, has a single goal, right? Make it valid English. Make it, add all the punctuation and capitalization and things like that. Make it so long, right? And so there are these different goals that are all fighting one another, which is one of the other reasons that it takes a while. But in there is not, I understand how physics works, or I actually know what laws exist, or I know how many fingers a human has, right? And I would say that that's the biggest catch. We'll actually look at some real rules that AI generated for me later, and I'll make the same point there that I will here, which is that the AI doesn't actually know anything. And so if the thing you're asking it is based on knowledge in any way, it's not going to do a good job. It might happen to be correct by accident, but it's not doing that because one of those layers knows what you're talking about. So if your use case is put text in the right order or put pixels in a rough arrangement, it's pretty good at that, actually. Ethical issues aside, like, technically speaking, it's really good at those things. But in the midst of that, it doesn't know what it's talking about, which is where code comes in. At least in my opinion, I don't use it for code because it will frequently make mistakes in the middle of code somewhere, and I will need to go find that later, whereas it would have been faster if I had written it. So, yeah.
And then here's the part of why I'm actually here. So in addition to being kind of a tinkerer and a general tech enthusiast and board gamer, I am an IP lawyer. And so the questions that come up are when you do create something, well, I'll use create in quotes because I don't know if what is being created is actually considered art because it is coming out of a computer, and we can have that kind of philosophical
From a legal perspective, not a philosophical one.
Right, yeah. Who owns what comes out of one of these generative AIs? And I have an example here. It's going to be small, and we'll get more into it later. But I asked it to create a rondelle of a prototype of a new game with spaces about cats. And so you can see it came up with this little cutesy, it's kind of cute. nobody owns this image. If I were to use this verbatim as the board, and I was going to say that, let's do that. Let's change a couple things here and there. Nobody owns that. Anyone can copy that, use it however they want. That is the current interpretation in very broad strokes of what both the Copyright Office and the district courts have said so far. This is also new. It has not gone to circuit courts. It's not gone to the Supreme Courts. There's not a lot of state courts haven't even touched this yet. So we have just the opening kind of gambit of what the courts have said. And then there's also the responses of, the exceptions to that. Because if you use this as inspiration, and I take this to an artist and I say, hey, I want it to look mostly like that. I like the art style. Can you kind of make it look kind of like this? And then kind of pencil in a few things. What that artist makes is then potentially something that, as long as it's different enough, then it becomes subject to copyright law. And it becomes something that is given those rights that are enshrined in the Constitution of America, that it is that is the basis for both copyright and patent law, this idea of owning intellectual property. And there's more philosophical things we can talk about, whether it's a good or a bad thing. But right now, that's kind of the baseline that we're working with. I see a question about...
Just to clarify.
Yeah.
So anything like completely generated by AI cannot be copyrighted.
As of right now, the idea that an AI model or generative AI or large language model is not human and therefore cannot own a copyright. And that is kind of the same thing with a patent. Only humans can own patents. There was a case in which a photographer handed, I think it was a chimpanzee, a camera. It took a selfie of itself.
Right.
And animal rights said, well, no, the animals should own that. Why does the photographer? And it turns out the answer is nobody owns that picture because copyrights are for humans.
So, like, what's the difference between? So, like, if I use Photoshop to make a picture, like, I still own the picture. Like, what's the difference between like using Photoshop to make a picture versus using Midjourney to make a picture?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so a lot of this comes back to these cases that are from when you had to stand really still for a photograph. Because the idea was you have posed those people and they stood real still so that it wasn't blurry and you got this perfect shot that was a lot of creativity. And that's where kind of modern views about copyright come from, and the answer to your question is that it is the human input, that the expression of where things go, where you would like the AI to fill in the details of, is a creative choice being made by a human. There's even an argument, we'll talk about prompts, with the idea that maybe the prompt that you're putting into the AI could actually be copyrightable. So if someone were to use the exact same prompt as you, and your creative vision when you created this very detailed prompt, maybe that could be copyrighted. But the issue is that unless you're doing something very specific from a technical standpoint, each time you type in a new prompt, you're going to get something different. And it's not going to be the exact same as what happened before. And copyright law relies on things being in a fixed, tangible medium. And so that's where we get into kind of why this is not fixed. It changes each time. How could you copy it? And so that's kind of the thing to consider, is that for the most part, no one will, if you see an image on Midjourney, which is one of the ones we'll talk about, it's Discord based, and everyone's images keep flying down each time they request them. Right now under copyright law, taking one of those and using it for whatever you want gives whoever created it, whoever prompted it, they don't have rights over that. And you just have to be aware of that when you're putting it in your own artwork. And that's why we'll talk about prototyping. Prototyping's, if you're going to discard it, it's going to be very quick. You want to just see how it looks like. Maybe a good idea. We'll talk. But from an endpoint, you have to make a lot of changes to the other lending thing. And it's
I was just want to say, so like the idea that you generally have in your head, whether you just put it to like an AI or not, either way, it's still not copyrightable.
Yeah, ideas are not copyrightable. The expressions of those ideas are. And that's the expression idea dichotomy. That's what my copyright professor will be very proud that I remember that. A very fancy name. But yeah, that's the idea, is that the only way you can protect an idea is through a patent, and that's protecting the process of something happening. Right. That's never been done before and is not obvious and all these other kind of rules.
And that you're about to make public, because patents require you to publish the process. So was there one more question, and then we should move on? Yeah.
To extend the analogy of posing people for a photo, if you've used generative AI to create an image and they propped it up and you painted it,
Yep.
right? You still do not own that copyright. Is that correct?
So if it's a painting, then the strokes, the all of that is creative input by a human. That is going to be copyrightable. The underlying image, if someone were to somehow find that image, they would be permitted to use it however they want. In my opinion, there's kind of differing views of this, because is this public domain or is just something else? Like, we don't really quite know because it never had a copyright. So how do you manage that? But my baseline is, if you're adding to it, then that's going to be enough to protect what you added to it. But the underlying work is still not something subject to copyright.
So I know you want to move on, but how much addition crosses that threshold?
Yeah, that's the question.
There's no answer.
No, there's not, and it'll be very unsatisfying because
That's part of the process. Why judges get involved.
Yeah.
So, but I think that the flip side of this then is, for a lot of people at Unpub, we're designers or we're publishers. There are artists, but that is definitely the minority at Unpub. And so a lot of times it's the second question of, okay, so I hire an artist, what should I be concerned with? And as a business owner, I would be concerned with, if they did use AI to generate the image and then didn't sufficiently change it, the liability there, like Eric said earlier, just to loop back around to that, is that if there's some value in that image to me, it's a character, it's a key piece of art, or, something on a box, someone else can go and use that and do whatever they want, and I can't actually go stop them, whereas normally I can if it's something that I own the copyright to, right? So again, I'll say, for prototyping, this is amazing. But if you're planning on doing something real, or you're trying to then some people will transition from Unpub straight into self-publishing. This stuff is radioactive as far as that.
you might pay someone a lot of money for their kind of
Yeah.
input on things.
Yeah.
And so I actually include in my contracts now a separate clause that says, as a part of their warranties, I warrant that I did not use, or that I essentially phrase it in a way that says that if you use it, you have to disclose it. And because I might not mind that they used Photoshop's new autofill feature in certain ways, but I need to know that in order to kind of make sure I can get what I paid for as far as the clients that I represent.
So,
and this is the big question of
I agree.
Goes a little bit beyond, I think, the legal side of things and into the ethical side of things. We talked about how all of you may have contributed to these models. Well, some people's life's work have gone into building up these models, and you can get very specific. Make me something that looks like this artist style, that does this, this, and this, and basically all of that kind of things that they created suddenly get fed into this model. And people are pissed about it. And I think we could argue rightfully so. We could argue that all creativity is, as Isaac Newton said, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. But at the same time, this feels a little different. And so there's some cases actively before the courts that are about this. But I also recognize that there's beyond copyright law implications to all of this that I, as an IP lawyer, I respect, but also know that as creators have a different view on sometimes. So be aware this is kind of a very, very good subject for people to talk about. I think people should be aware of the ethical considerations of what these models represent and who they came from, because they would not exist without the creative work of people who came before them. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think I think we could have a very lengthy debate, and I think people will debate that for a long time.
I think it's at least good to keep pointing out, right? This needs to not just be a question that people start ignoring. It needs to be one that we get some real answers to. What are the liabilities there? And again, on the business side, I think this just increases the radioactivity of AI as a part of my process if I was publishing something. And then on the prototyping side, I think it's more of an ethical question. And I think that some of it comes from, if I'm going to look for a particular person's style, well, then that person is unwittingly helping me in my pitch to the DeWitts or something like that, right? But I think to some extent that is still an open question. However, we're gonna try and have some fun with this. So, who here knows who the Luddites actually were as a political group, instead of just as a punchline? All right. So Luddites, we use, oh, you're such a Luddite because you're bad with technology. The original Luddites weren't bad with technology. They were really good at a craft. And then the political landscape was such that they were industrializing away the thing that they were good at and taking all control away from them over the output of their own labor. And so the Luddites were a political group who was violently protesting by smashing machines this industrialization. And I love bringing them back into this as at least an option. Like, we can be fully anti-AI as well, which will leave, again, as sort of the big open question for the mixer especially. Like, hey, here you go. I give you all something to talk about at the mixer.
You can tell we're fun at parties.
But I did think it would be fun to get the AI to then generate a picture of a bunch of Luddites that want to smash machines. So that was very fun. It took me quite a while. Again, the AI doesn't know anything. I asked it at one point to give me a diverse group of Luddites, and they were literally the same face all the way across. So that's not what I meant. So then I tried to be extremely specific about who I wanted to see, and you can still see that it missed the brief on 3 people in that picture. Moving on. So we wanted to talk a bit about kind of moving back into like the fun and the practical. What are your actual options? I mean, people, if you haven't explored, you just kind of, I keep seeing ChatGPT in the news, or my friends are talking about this or that. What actually is out there? And so 3 that we recommended is kind of, hey, these are ones to start exploring if this is a thing that you are using a lot and that you find a lot of value out of. ChatGPT is one of them, and they're an absolute titan just in terms of the mind share, but they're not always the best. So some of the other ones, this Copilot, and you'll see a lot of similarities between these two because the businesses have a relationship, so they share some of the same models. You'll see me use, if we're doing some of the live stuff, and we'll get to that later, you'll see me use Copilot because under the hood, it's actually a lot of the same things as the OpenAI engines, but you can use it under certain circumstances for free. And then Claude is a third one that's kind of up and coming, and I see it a lot more on the professional text side. So a lot of people I know, either for code or for generating lots of text, who do so professionally and see AI as an improvement to their workflow. And text is even more, I think, ethically, I don't know, I think it's a greener field, a greener area. There's a lot fewer landmines, I think, in the text side. They get a lot of luck out of Claude. So if you're trying to generate a lot of text for something, hey, give me a starting point for some backstory for this character based on a big prompt. Claude would be another tool to look at. But
I almost exclusively use ChatGPT. That's my thing of choice when I'm doing it because and we'll talk more about this, but the prompt is the most important thing that goes into any of these. A bad prompt will give you, because exactly, it's looking for what you are trying to find. So your prompt might be several paragraphs long even sometimes. You are a board game designer trying to assist another board game designer with designing a game about this. Like, being that specific will actually get you a better outcome because you're not having a guess at what you're trying to do. You're telling it the truth.
Yeah, and thinking back to the explanation that I was giving, right? You're adding more layers. You're adding more things that have to be happy with the output it's giving you before it gives you something.
Yeah. And then there are some free options to mess around with, and I think that one of them we talked about was Midjourney. It is through Discord. It is just rapid fire. You can see all the stuff. It has a lot of good. A lot of these places are putting in ethical roadblocks for people doing deep fakes and stuff like that. They were trying to stop that from happening. Big recent one was a Taylor Swift thing that was really disgusting that got out onto the internet, and it was not made by any of the ones that are available. I think it actually was made by the 4th one. It is the, which I'm kind of hesitant about, but there is a local version called Stable Diffusion that you can actually run on pretty low-powered machines that I've messed around with, that it's kind of just the same idea as everything else, but you're downloading it locally. So there's just more stuff that you can tweak. Like if you want a very specific style, you can train the model yourself and kind of have it be more consistent, but it also opens the door for some just nefarious people to do nefarious things.
Wait, how's Midjourney but Discord?
What's
So-
that?
What's the bit but Discord?
So I was wanting to put those bits in there. And so the but Discord part is because we talked about the IP issues with creating generative AI images. Midjourney is extremely public by default because you're on a public Discord in order to interact with Midjourney in some way. I think there are ways to get it connected to other servers potentially,
Yeah,
but
but
certainly.
you could make your own Discord server and invite the bot into your Discord.
But it's all
certainly,
going through,
it requires interaction with Discord. And then Stable Diffusion, I both agree with everything you said about it being the one most useful if you want to do something horrible, but also it has, so you have to do a lot of local setup to get it to work. But because you're doing all of that local setup, it does also let you customize generative AI in a way that is also way more ethical and way more useful. And so where I see professional artists, so I mentioned the Claude thing for professional text creating people. Stable Diffusion is the one I keep hearing about from artist friends, from people who are using this primarily for their work or to kick off their work. They are putting together Stable Diffusion setups that use their own images. Hey, I own all this stuff. Make me a starting point for this piece of art for such a client. And they're doing paint overs on 50% of the way their piece of art because it's already been trained on their specific art style, right? And so I think if that's interesting to you, like I think that's a way to go as well. So it's both good and bad there.
So you can do the same kind of thing with public domain art if you wanted.
You absolutely
absolutely.
could.
Yep.
Yes.
So would you say that offers the most protection to a publisher who's contracting with an artist that's training on their own work?
I would say so because that sort of liability, radioactivity is the public nature of it. If nobody gets the source art, it's kind of moot. Or if it's changed in such a way that it is no longer meaningfully an AI generated piece of art, right? Then you have a lot of, he's the lawyer, but you have a lot more leg room there in my understanding. And I think that's some of where the Adobe Suite tools are going too. So I think, again, a lot of those Photoshop tools and the in-painting, they call it, is when you, hey, take this region and kind of fill in the gaps, right? And there's still, again, a lot of human input to creating this image, and then there's a little piece of, well, I need to fill in the background, or fill in this, or extrapolate from what I've already added to it. And there, I mean, the heart of the image is something you created. There's a lot of copyrightable material in the center there, even if the fringes or something AI help with. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool. Anything else to add there?
No, I think Bing is also runs on DALL-E. So if you see the phrase DALL-E, DALL-E, that's what the model is basically called for OpenAI. Bing runs off of that because Microsoft has a very large stake in OpenAI, and so that is all going through the same spot. A lot of them say that they will tell you up front, we train every response that comes in through a public portal will be used to train the model, and it'll all go in a giant circle and it'll be incorporated. If you pay for it, then you can press a button that says don't use my data to train your model. If you go through the APIs, which you're also paying for, they don't train it, but I assume it is saved somewhere, even if they say they're not. And I will subpoena that if I can as a lawyer and say, give me all of that. I know it's there somewhere. And it probably is. And it's existing on it. So just being aware of that, I think, is important. When you put, for like Samsung, for example, some of their engineers put trade secrets into one of the early models of ChatGPT, and you could ask about things that suddenly Samsung's trade secrets were popping up and some like pieces of their code they were using. And that is a nightmare from a legal standpoint, especially because attorney-client privilege is breached the minute that happens. and you can't get it back. But also from trade secrets are important too, I assume.
Yeah. Very.
So are those no longer secrets then?
Yep. Yeah. If you don't put the proper protections in place to protect your trade secrets, they're not, and so you don't get protection for them in situations like that.
All right, so like I mentioned, I kind of got, hey, let's rope in a game design side of this. I think the legal aspect is super fascinating, and the practical aspect is super fascinating. And I hadn't actually tried this way before, so I'll tell you what. I'm working a survival game. I want to try and use these newer engines, right? This is Dolly, the latest image generation hot engine, and I want to make a card for a survival game. And the general idea with this game is a deck of cards. We're going to flip over cards, and we're going to put cubes on those cards. So it needs a way to indicate to players that cubes go on this thing. And it's an underground theme, so we're going to work on a cave. And so I gave it a prompt. Hey, just kind of curious, can you give me a normal poker-sized card with a solid black border depicting a top-down view of a cave and include 3 1-centimeter square green solid squares? Right? I got really want it to be square. There's already a bunch of prompts above this, so I'm really trying to narrow in. The left is hilariously bad. Completely misses the prompt.
Wow.
The right one, I love that there's 3 different colors of green and a gray. I don't know what, again, it doesn't know anything. 3 and plus 1, why not? We'll just give you an extra. They are individually labeled. What I can only imagine is what the robot thinks: 2.5 inches, 3.5 inches, 3.5 inches, and 1 centimeter. They're labeled that way. Now, I will give it. That's pretty.
That's cool.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
Like those are cool. They look really neat.
The borders are cool too. I like how it's yeah.
But they're not top. But they're not top down. Exactly. They're not top down, and it doesn't have this. All right. Let me. And like Eric wisely pointed out earlier, a lot of this comes down to how specific are you? Can you be specific enough? And a lot of these conversational ones, like Eric just said, it's feeding your inputs and outputs back into the machine. It's learning from you. And so you can tell it things like, no, that wasn't right. Please do this instead.
Try it
and
again.
So over time you can get it, you can try to get it closer and closer and closer going on. So I'm here, all right, I'll try it again. Tell you what, digital art, solid black border. Let's just get, I'm not going to ask you about the size of the card. Let's just get the art. All right, with an underground cave, growing like it. I still want my squares on top of the art. We'll put it up on the art. I don't know.
You got your squares, right?
Maybe there's something.
There's squares.
Maybe there's something here, like really artsy square spaces for cubes to go in. And this one looked really cool. I don't know if it thinks these are the squares.
Oh.
Or just squares on squares on squares on. I don't know.
Yo, dog, I heard you like squares.
I heard you like squares. I
Keep
put
typing
squares
squares in this section. You're gonna get squares.
You're gonna get squares. And then one more time. Like, all right. So tell you what. 3 solid squares, each 1 centimeter wide. In the final image, please put it in there. We got 4.
Wow.
We got 4 again.
Worse.
In perspective, I suppose those were square before you kind of tweaked it. Again, beautiful. It's really good at arranging the pixels in a way that satisfies the constraints of make a piece of art. It completely failed again and again and again and again to give me 3 squares on top of it. And then, all right. So, I mean, any quick. We'll have more Q&A. But
Are there any bugs in it at all?
What do you mean?
The
says
file
it
called
says
Stranger
bugs.
Bugs? I can't see any
Oh,
bugs.
yeah, there's a small. I
There's
see
a
a bug.
little spidery.
Oh, okay,
look at the spiders.
I
So it
can't
did
see their
technically-
neck.
You trying to question the AI? Come on.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
they can hear us.
Yeah, you could kind of, but they blend in so much detail.
Fail.
Yeah, I forgot about the bugs. I forgot I'd tell it. Hey, small strange creatures and smaller stranger bugs. And it just,
Yeah.
Have you tried any meta prompting techniques like offering to tip the AI?
See, that's between between Schoon and the AI. That's
we don't disclose that.
yes.
Something I do for my D&D campaigns when I'm generating character art using AI is I'll prompt the AI to give me a prompt to to put into.
Yeah.
an
Oh,
AI.
sure.
Have you tried that with making cards or graphic design?
I haven't
So-
tried that, but I should actually. Sorry.
Sorry, no. So the paid version of ChatGPT, the reason why it is considered extra good is that when you ask for images, it creates the prompt that it thinks will get you the best prompt for what you're looking for. And so I have a quick example. I'm just going to show on my iPad. So I was doing a game of Goblin Quest. Are any of you familiar with Goblin Quest?
Yeah.
Grant Hewitt's or Howitt's Rules Light. And so my son and I enjoy that. It is very funny. I came up with 4 dumb things that the goblins could hold in the game and that we were going to do. And then first it gave me the actual goblins. This is the giant spectacles. They're over-round spectacles that are comically large for a goblin's face. The ducky floating ring, the spaghetti strainer helmet, and the mismatched shoes. First we got the actual images. They're cute. They did the purposes, but I was like, no, I want to import them further. And so I kept asking it questions, and I got the actual helmet. And then I wanted to go one step further, and it actually got down to this.
Icon.
And so, like, that is purely just for my son and I's enjoyment. This is not something that I could have very easily gone to a real artist or even just stock images that already occur that probably look very close. Oh, yeah. This one's pretty random.
That was pretty.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty great, actually.
But it was something that was just like a fun, like, oh, this is this idea that we have. We came up with these together. We've got some other kind of very disturbing creature hybrids that have occurred. That's like octopus cat and things like that. But I think that's where when you start to kind of dial down to something very specific, it is helpful. But definitely most of what you're trying to get when you're looking for technical aspects, this is exactly what you get. These kind of like, no, I'm not going to follow what you say. I'm going to give you what I think you should do, and then it provides that.
Yeah. So then, I'd actually heard other designers talking about getting ChatGPT to generate rules, to fully design the rules for a game. I have to try this. So I fired up full ChatGPT, and I was very, board game rules. We use decks of cards, players should interact, players could purchase with these resources. I gave it specific mechanics where I'm really trying to get it, hey, I want you to give me these rules. And I described to an AI company, a CTO for an AI company, who was talking to me about some of this stuff, and I said, Chat, for this particular exercise, what I got back was extremely impressive and entirely useless. But it started with a title and an introduction of the theme. It was long, including the AI once created to serve us has turned against us, relentlessly pursuing its own agenda.
Saving the earth. That's a warning.
This was the first draft from the robot. I love it. And so, but it kept going. Like, all right, so we're supposed to gather. It's regurgitating my prompt almost exactly. We're going to gather resources. We're going to purchase upgrades and ultimately defeat the machines threatening human. Perfect. I love this. I love it. All right, we got a setup. Shuffle a deck. Shuffle another deck. Choosing a character token? All right. I assume we're going to learn about character tokens later.
Starting space.
We got a game board with a starting space. Interesting. A starting hand of resources. We got places and events. We got upgrade resources.
Okay.
All right. I guess
That's
it's
a-
another deck. Somewhere
that's a
in
stretch
there.
goal, though, right?
Right.
It's a stretch goal.
Determine starting. I love that even the AI feels the need to add determine the starting player and play proceeds clockwise. Great. So it wouldn't be game rules if it didn't put that in there somewhere. And I'm summarizing. We're not going to read the whole thing, but it kind of broke down. Like here's the different kinds of encounters you can have with places and events and different machines, and here's the little prompt for the gameplay. It did not proceed to explain like what the decks were, how they interacted, how things happened. Game end. All right, game end when the players successfully defeat the final machine. What machine? There's no explanation about machines, machine threats, how to interact with them, reclaiming the world from its mechanical oppressors. Alternatively, if all players are eliminated or unable to continue, no idea why they wouldn't be able to continue, but for some reason they can't, then all right, fine, maybe they gotta go to the bathroom. The machines reign supreme, and humanity's struggle for survival is lost. And so it it so perfectly demonstrated by itself that piece I was talking about before, where it knows absolutely nothing about games. But it knows how to talk like a game designer. And so it perfectly hallucinated a big list of rules that were absolutely nonsense, absolutely useless. In contrast, I was kind of curious. All right, fine. So you made this game, ChatGPT. Again, they're conversational. So something that's really impressive with these models is I could reference that. I didn't have to re-explain everything. I just say, hey, those places and events cards that you just told me about, upgrades cards, resource cards for the game that you just designed. Can you give me that deck of cards? And this is where I was also super impressed because, again, mechanically, absolutely worthless. No explanation whatsoever of how these work. But I was really surprised at the breadth. We've got an abandoned city, a toxic waste dump, a refugee camp where you're worried about overcrowding and limited resources. We've got wildfire, radioactive fallout, ambush, bunker, sandstorm, a rogue AI encounter, a mutant infestation, and then for upgrades, armor, weapons, survival, stealth module, sure, why not? Medic kit, vehicle upgrades, hacking. All right, we haven't talked about what hacking would even mean, but you're going to give it to me anyway, and a reconnaissance satellite. And I was just really, really floored. And then the resource cards. All right, what are the things that we would be concerned about in this? I didn't tell it post-apocalyptic, but it just decided post-apocalyptic game. Rations, water, fuel, ammo, scrap metal. So if I just needed to get inspiration, which was a word that you used before, there's a book, it's called The Tome of Adventure Design by Matt Finch. And it's a really great, it's big tables for generating a dungeon. And it could have been just that, and it would have been easily worth the price of admission. But when you crack open this book, in the margins are just random phrases all over this book. Nice. And he refers to it as the apophenia engine. Apophenia is the human instinct to apply meaning and patterns to what we see, even when they don't matter, when they're nonsense, right? And I love this, and I will probably use it again someday as another apophenia engine. It's another way for me to, hey, let me ask it for nonsense on purpose to kickstart my own brain's creative processes to get unstuck and find a new thing. So again, I think there are some use cases here, unlike, say, cryptocurrency. Yeah. But it was, as I put it, very impressive and completely useless. So, we had solicited some cards first. I also know there were a lot of questions, so we can skip over that for the moment, depending on how.
Yeah, I think that there's probably
3:45
enough questions, and I'll do one quick other use case that I think is actually super interesting. So my law firm does a year-end. What did we file? We file publicly available filings, and so I went on to the Patent and Trademark Office's bulk data set. I downloaded the year, and so before I was a lawyer, I was a database administrator, so I come by it honestly of really enjoying data, and it usually just takes me forever because it's been 15 years since I remember how to do basic database stuff, and so I slowly can extract data. My wife's much better at it than I am. And then what I did is I took it, all the data that was from my firm, I put it with ChatGPT, and you can drag it over and say, how many countries did I file in this year? And it said, you filed in 30 countries, here's the top 5. And it gave me all of the countries based on this Excel sheet that I just put in there. I could have come up with that eventually. I could have done a pivot table that would have gotten me what I needed, but that was, I thought, a really cool use of it because it was like, and make it ready to post on LinkedIn. And it gave me little dumb emojis and all this kind of stuff that I don't recommend. But with that, I started thinking, okay, could this be used in your playtesting? And the way that it could be used is having large sets of data. Especially if you're playing playtesting online, you might have board game arena-like stats of how long each turn took, how long what do you do with that? And without having a degree in data science and being able to kind of like do that, this might give you some insights. Again, it will lie to you, so don't trust it for important things. But one of the examples I did where I had 5 cards, one of them was clearly overpowered, and the cost was way less than what the power level was, and it did accurately say, card number 4 has got a problem, and you should take a look at it. But you can do things like that, like what's the average playtime for people with the first name John, and like things like that. That it will give you pretty good information with that, and I think it could be used as a way to give you more insights into the data that you already have. As long as you double check and if it feels wrong, trust your instincts, because it will give you more of what you want to hear than what it actually will give you good data. The question is
to touch on that, what we did with some of the flavor tasting in the past was we had a survey that people fill in.
Yeah.
And one of the columns that took into ChatGPT was give me sentiment analysis.
Oh yeah,
all the
perfect.
feedback and
Sentiment analysis, great.
Negative, positive, and I just started with negative.
Yeah, because it knows what are good words, what are bad words, and that's a great use of it.
The other thing you could do with it is, rather than like just give it your data and ask it to tell you something about your data, you can like give it, if you have your data in a database, you can give it your database schema and ask it to like write an SQL query for you.
So,
yeah.
So do we have any other questions before? Because I'm just looking at the time. We're getting. What's
no
that?
one's in here after, so if you need to go with
Okay.
questions, that's why we have it staggered. So.
Thank you.
I do have a question, and I'm not being confusing AI with machine learning. I
Uh-huh.
often hear on Jeff Engelstein's podcast, he talks about using computers to run
Sure.
the same game and run the computer against each other thousands of times to improve their strategy.
Okay.
I guess
So-
that's a whole different.
That's a good question. So AI, I think, is a bad name for it. This is not an artificial intelligence. It is not creating any new concepts or things from that. It is analyzing data. So it is interacting with machine learning. I think those are two concepts. So generative AI is a way of talking to the underlying data that could then be doing machine learning to actually analyze the data underneath it. So they work together, but I think that they're in the same kind of idea, but one is more of a front end for interacting with the data, then machine learning is actually kind of processing the data in a very concrete way based on what you're asking it to look into, is the way that I understand it. I'm not sure if that's...
Yeah, does that answer your question? I feel like there's a lot adjacent to that question, but if it helps from a technical perspective, the kind of the high-tech startup world, things like that, large language model is often what people use to refer to this technology, and we leave AI for the marketers. AI as a term is often something that gets used in marketing. Large language model is the term used to talk about the actual technology.
Yes.
So looking at your two things, if you take your game design interactions and you keep drilling down as if you were a player trying to learn the rules, it will keep giving you more interesting information. Tell me how to use the resource cards.
Sure.
It will give you some details of how to use those 12 different kind of resources.
Yeah, is there a question in there? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, so I'm just more of a suggestion. On your database of your court cases, rather than just using it for data searching, you can also ask it from its AI intelligence, show me trends over the last 5 years on decisions made in these kinds of cases.
Right. As long as it has been trained in a way that, if I trained it myself, then I would say that it would be correctly, but part of the training process is adding these keywords in and saying, here, pull this, and it's not for the truth of the matter, it's just for things that have been put in writing. And so a lot of things can, and then there's the whole thing of weights of models, you'll see that will show you different things like that of how much do you weight what's being put in versus what the model has, and that's all very proprietary for a lot of these, which is a part of the ethical part of it is, should they be showing how much they say? Well, when someone searches for Batman, we give them Batman versus we give them a masked crusader that is non-infringing Batman. And that's all kind of behind the scenes stuff that's still being done very actively.
So any other questions in particular from folks we haven't heard from yet, or we're sitting back? Yeah?
So So I just have a question to better understand the training. So basically, if I were to prompt ChatGPT or whatever software generative AI I'm using, if we were using it for data to, let's say, do a statistical analysis or create a regression model, to predict the effect of like being first player on winning the game, I basically couldn't guarantee that it was actually running that analysis unless I had trained it myself. Is that the
Right. So when you got a model like this, so in general, yes, what you just said, true. When you've got a model like this that we're looking at, right? Again, this large language model. The reason that we use that term for the technology is again describing those layers of this kind of whole suite of tools separate from the data that was used to feed it. So trying to think about how much detail to give here. So essentially, it's like the model itself is knowing it has these data points and kind of connections between them, right? These kind of empty buckets, if you want to think about it. So maybe the simplest possible bucket is I got an input bucket on the one side and an output bucket on the other side, and a weight for how often I think we should go from this input bucket to that output bucket, right? And as you add inputs and add layers and get things bigger and more stretched out, we have more of these numbers that I need to tune. And you can build those models to solve specific problems. If your model is not designed to address a particular situation, it is never going to address that situation conclusively, right? It might be able to guess, but it's never going to be able to specifically solve your problem. And so a lot of these large language models, even ChatGPT, they are guessing. They're getting really, really good at guessing closely, or guessing that might, in a way that might still be accurate the majority of the time. But going back to our earlier point, if you don't have a good intuition for what the answer should be, you can't really trust its output because it's still guessing. It's still all probabilistic under the hood. And so you really need to find some way to double check it.
And you can also tell it, that's not right. And then I'll say, oh, I'm sorry. And then it'll give you a different answer. It's and so it relies on you for the truth, not being the truth.
Yeah, but I think that if you have like...
Check back again later.
I think if you had, I think if you had data that you wanted to do a regression analysis on, you probably wouldn't like... You might like use, if you didn't know how to do the regression analysis, you might ask ChatGPT write me Python code that does the regression analysis.
But even then, it might be wrong, right? and it might not actually do it correctly. So even asking it for other approximations, again, going back to the use cases, I think some of the best use cases are where there isn't a right answer.
Yeah.
And you want inspiration, or I want, I'm okay with you approximating this. Just get me out of my own head for a second. And I feel like it's particularly good at that.
I used it for songwriting. That I had one line. I needed it to be 7 syllables, and I needed it to rhyme with began. And I was like, give me 20 different lines with 7 syllables that begin, and it just dumps them all out. And then it's almost just like, what was it? There was a Shakespearean idea of, it's like take all the Shakespearean sonnets and then just randomly mash them up and see what kind of art comes out of it. This was from 20 years ago. And I love that as like an inspirational tool. Exactly. What was the word for it?
Apophenia?
Apophenia. I'm going to write that down because that is exactly, I think, what it's great for. It's just like, oh, here's this little thing that I can kind of build on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do, other questions, because one thing that with paid GPT is you can create your own little permanent subset of things. And so someone in the back was talking about their D&D campaign. Well, that's something you can build on, that you can give it all these details about the world you're living in, and then you can ask it questions about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting idea. I have a bunch of trademark blogs that you can load into a GPT and ask questions about stuff I wrote. And that's kind of, I think, a better idea of using stuff that you created that kind of keep track of your ideas, but not trusting it for absolute truth.
And there again is getting further away from some of the ethical dilemmas too, right? Because it's your own source material.
Question on that, when you do that, are you
giving it permission to add that to their language.
I have checked a box that said do not. It's a tiny little checkbox that says please don't use all my data. And do I trust it? Absolutely not. And I assume it's all going back in there. And so, yeah, I don't use it for anything that would potentially bring.
So again, wouldn't use it for billion-dollar trade secrets. But if it's a homebrew D&D campaign, probably safe. Yeah, one more, and then I think we're gonna wrap up because the next door is sort of designer. Here's a design question that's stumping me with 3 amazing designers.
Yeah.
You should go ask them.
Absolutely, kicking you all out.
Mine isn't a wrap-up question. So.
Okay.
Okay.
So-
well then we'll talk. We'll interface off.
Yeah, and you know, we are maybe more fun at parties than this talk would make it sound. So feel free to come find us at the Mixer too and ask us about.
What is the Mixer?
It's 6 o'clock.
tonight.
Yep.
And it's downstairs. We kind of saw that there's the restaurant. As you're going out from the unpub area, there's the restaurant. Keep going, and there's actually an enclosed kind of ballroom / seating area. That's where the Mixer will be at 6.
And for everyone who contributed ideas, the final game is called Mystic Melodies. Players delve into a spooky world where a baby dragon with a passion for music discovers a stainless steel mandolin.
Baby dragon mandolin.
There's more, but I'll leave you guys hanging for next Unpub. This will be my prototype.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it was fun.